All right. For those who don't know, my name is Thomas Irwin. I'm one of the core team trying to start the And Campaign LA chapter. I just wanted to take a moment and share with you all who are watching this video some of what I shared this past Saturday at our launch event. Obviously, if you're watching this video, you probably weren't able to make it, which we understand, but I wanted to make sure that folks who are interested had a chance to kind of hear a little bit about what we're hoping for 2024, the vision that we have for the chapter, and the vision that we have for LA, and the ways in which we would love to have you kind of work with us and join us in some of these things that we're wanting to do. The big thing, kind of top line, is we really want to start following Jesus into practical action. We have a lot of big, lofty goals that are part of the kind of campaign vision. This idea of, carrying the church being engaged in the city, and kind of caring for the whole biblical witness. But I think it's really important as we do that, kind of on a high level of values, to keep in mind that Jesus didn't just call us to talk about caring for our neighbors. He didn't just call us to have discussions or give sermons or listen to sermons. In the Good Samaritan parable, when Jesus finishes, he says, "Go and do likewise." Um, and our heart is to do the same, to be the people that go and who act based on our love for Jesus. I just want to share a little bit about our process, how we got here. So, what we've kind of tried to do over the last, let's say, year, as we have explored starting the chapter, is to really not just kind of have one set idea of what LA needs or wants, but to really kind of go through a good process of crafting a vision. This is a process. It's not like a one-off thing that now we have a vision, we're going to follow it forever. It's a continuous process. It starts with listening, right? So listening, talking to folks in our city, asking the question, what are the deep needs, right? What are the places where people are hurting? People have issues in their community. Going from there into research, right? So what can be done that is effective about these issues? There's issues that might be existing in our city where there's not an easy solution, right? Or there might be solutions that could be counterproductive or create unintended consequences. Really want to think critically about that. From there, we kind of ask the question of education, right? What do we need to know to actually? We know that there's an effective way to address this issue. What do we do? What do we need to know? And then what does the chapter? What do other churches in LA need to know in order for us to take action on this? And then the last step, of course, is action, right? So what can we do? What do we need to do um, to take action in our city? And then from there, it kind of resets itself, right? So there's reflecting on, um, what we did, right? So we'll set out some campaign goals for 2024, and then this time next year we'll reassess and say, like, how did those go? Did they were successful? Did they not? Are there things we need to tweak, change? Other issues we need to care about? So we see 2024 as really, we kind of set the base by doing listening sessions, doing research sessions. 2024 is really where we want to do education and action, right? Really focus on those um, two processes. All right. So what are we going to do in 2024? Hopefully, I this cartoon is something you find light and funny. I think on a serious note, though, I think there's a huge calling for the church to speak into the upcoming election. And I want to be specific about this. So I think many Americans, and I think many of us here in LA, many pastors, many church leaders are exhausted having gone through 2020, which was a hard year for the church. I think between COVID, between the protests and social unrest we saw in the summer of 2020 around racial injustice, around the election, and obviously all the things that happened after the election, there was just a lot of things that divided Christians, a lot of things that I think were hard for churches to process, may have divided churches, may have split churches in some cases, and folks may have left. Maybe you're someone who left the church, maybe you're someone who pastors a church, and there's people who left your church. And so I think there's a lot of hesitation going into 2024, the desire to avoid politics. But that's simply not sustainable. As the election comes and it looks increasingly likely that we'll have a rematch. It's going to be a lot of the same rhetoric, a lot of the same issues are going to come up, and we're going to have to speak into those again. Um, and I think the answer that we want to kind of present to the question of what to do about 2024 is that we as a church in LA are called to avoid two extremes, right? So the first extreme is one I've kind of alluded to, which is avoidance, which I think is where my pulse is where a lot of folks are right now. That we've been able to avoid these questions for a couple years. That's not going to be a sustainable solution. So we want to avoid that. On the other side, we want to avoid getting really into the mire and the muck of what we're going to see in 24 in terms of ugly rhetoric, in terms of things that are just going to again not be edifying to the church. We want to chart a different path, and I think the specific path that I want to challenge us to target is that focuses not on national politics but on local politics. So as my screen, you can see these were some of the propositions that were on the ballot here in California in 2022. Full disclosure, I didn't grow up in California. I grew up in Virginia. So when I moved here in 2014, I was shocked by the sheer number of things that I had to feel like I understood and research in order to vote on every election cycle. Um, every 4 years, we all have to remind ourselves, what is the Board of Equalization? What does it do? Why does it exist? My opinion is that it shouldn't exist, but that's a topic for another day. Um, I think the reason we want to lead with local politics is quite simple. It's where we can actually impact change. If we focus our energy on this ugly kind of national conversation, the truth is that the church in Los Angeles, we're going to have very limited impact on what happens here and on these questions. The good news is that here in local politics, we can have a great deal of impact. I think Jesus does care about the national election cycle, and I think that it is important for the church to speak into it. But I think often our focus on politics becomes 80% focused on national politics and 20%, if any, on local politics. I think that should be flipped. We should be 80% focused on local politics, and with the remaining 20, speak into national politics where we really do have, in the cases that we really, really need to speak. I think this is being shrewd. I think this is what Jesus calls us to do. I think there's a lot of ways in which we can shine a light in local politics, because local politics just gets neglected by a lot of people, and so the church can have a huge, disproportionate impact in this sphere. I'll share a personal story, which is that in 2022, in spring of 2022, I was on a Zoom meeting with my elected representative in the State Assembly of California. So, State Assembly of California, if you're not familiar, California has about 40 million people. There are 80 people in the state assembly. So, each person in State Assembly represents about 500,000 people, which is quite a few, right? These are not small districts. We had 8 people on the Zoom meeting. We were talking about housing. We were doing housing advocacy. We were talking about specific bills that we thought could have an impact in our local neighborhood that were being heard in the state assembly. At the end of this meeting, it was a good meeting. We really appreciated the state assemblywoman's staff. She wasn't actually on the call, but her staff was, which is, if you're familiar with politics, you know that staff are actually often the ones who really shape the decisions that are made by the people. So don't be disappointed if you're in a meeting and you talk to staff. But at the end of this meeting, the staff mentioned offhandedly that they also appreciated that we took the time to meet with them, and that the 8 of us were the largest group of people they had had a meeting with to that point in the year. Period. We were shocked, right? 8 people is not a lot in a district of 500,000 people. But the truth is that local politics is one where, because it's often neglected, a group of 8 people really can influence change, right? I don't know, I can't go into our assemblywoman's mind and know how much, knowing from staff, hey, there were 8 people and they said they'd like you to vote on this. We don't know if that changed her mind. We don't know how much that influenced her. My guess is it probably was not the biggest or even top 5 factors in her decision making process, but I think it does make an impact. So that 8 people being on Zoom, being willing to be on Zoom, right? That is something that over the course of time really does add up. And that leads me into, okay, so if we want to care about local politics, um, how are we supposed to do that? What are we supposed to do? Um, we really want, specifically as we engage local politics, to have a focus on one particular issue. And in our listening and our researching, we really want to focus this chapter's energy on housing and homelessness. And I'll tell you why. Um, there's a lot of issues in LA. There's a lot of things that impact people, but there's something about housing, specifically in Southern California. And when I say LA, I just want to clarify, I mean LA County, not just the city of Los Angeles. There's something about Southern California that the cost of housing has just made a disproportionate impact on the livelihood of people compared to other cities. This is a graphic from The Economist magazine, global magazine. This is from this past week, they found that Los Angeles is the sixth most expensive city in the world in terms of the cost of living. The biggest driver of that is housing. In terms of cities in the US, the only city that's ahead of us is New York, and not by much. Um, uh, just for comparison, right? Like you might just think like, oh, okay, well these are big, they're global cities. Of course, big global cities are expensive. That's inevitable, right? I think that's a common thing, especially for folks who are older, who lived here for a while. LA's always been expensive, right? This is just the way things are. Um, I think the example of Tokyo is a really useful one. Tokyo is the largest city in the world. It has the largest GDP of any city in the world. It has a GDP of $2 trillion. Huge economy, huge number of people. The cost of living in Tokyo is 70% of what it is in Los Angeles, right? So it's not inevitable that you have a city that's large, where a lot of people want to live, where there's a lot of economic activity. It's not inevitable that cities like that have to be expensive, right? They're never going to be cheap, but they don't have to be this expensive. Now there's a lot of other reason, in recent years, as the cost of living has gotten so high, specifically around housing, it's actually earned LA a lot of awards, and these are not good awards. These are like bad awards you don't want to get. LA is now, in 2022, was measured to be the most overcrowded city, and so overcrowded doesn't just mean like the most people per capita. It means how many people are there over here, and then how many housing units are there, and we have the highest ratio of people to housing units. And what that looks like, especially where I live on the east side, is you have extended families, multiple generations, multiple sets of families, right? Like you might have one parent and then their sibling and their kids, all of which in one house. That's the only way people have to kind of cope with the cost of living. So we're the most overcrowded city. We're the worst place for first-time home buyers, at least we were in 2022. And then I think specifically for Christians thinking about how do we care for the least of these, we're the most expensive city for single parents. And in this case, like because we're the most expensive, the worst city to try to be a single parent in the US. I think these are things we should be concerned about, right? These are things that the church will have to answer to Jesus for the way in which we cared about this issue or didn't care about this issue. And then I want to just really highlight, this is a recent article. There is a strong reason to link the issue of housing to the issue of homelessness. LA has the largest homeless population of any city in the any county in the United States. This is from latest count. We had 75,518 people that we counted that are currently, this is from 2023, living on the streets. So LA is the largest county in the US, but the second two largest counties in the US, Harris County, Texas, which is where Houston is, and Cook County, Chicago, which is where Cook County, Illinois, sorry, where Chicago is. Those are the second two largest cities in terms of population. But if you compare population, LA is about twice as big as both of them. But LA has vastly more folks living on the streets. Compared to Houston, we have 23 times the number of people living on the streets. And this is not, when I say streets, I mean both people who are living in shelters and people who are living on the actual street, people who don't have a house. Compared to Chicago, we have 12 times as many people living on the street. This is incredible, right? That we would have this. And I don't want to try to give you, this is a complicated issue. Homelessness is a complicated issue. There's many reasons why people become homeless. So I don't want to say that there's only one reason why homelessness is a problem in LA. But when you do look at metro areas across the US, there is one factor that disproportionately correlates with, and you can see it mapped here, that disproportionately correlates with the number of people who are homeless, again, in shelter and on the street unsheltered, and that's rent, right? The median cost of rent in a city. There are no expensive cities in the US that don't have a large and disproportionate homeless population. And LA, as one of the most expensive cities in the US, it's not surprising that we have, and also the largest, it's not surprising that we have the largest homeless population. Again, this is an issue that's complex. We're gonna give space in 2024 to talk more about this issue, right? If maybe this is something you don't fully agree with me on, that's okay. We can talk more about it. But I do want to just hammer home this point that there is a link between housing and homelessness, and it's really important. And when we consider the work that we do. How did LA get so unaffordable. I'm going to move my screen just a little bit here, so you can see my slide. What you have to really ask the question: how did LA become so unaffordable? You have to ask the question: well, what makes for an affordable city? Again, a complicated issue. This is something we're going to unpack a lot more in 2024. But I just want to propose three kind of principles that go into whether or not a city has an affordable housing stock. Those three are subsidy, stability, and supply. So what do I mean by that? Subsidy. How much? So these are not my ideas. They come from Shane Phillips, who's a researcher at UCLA, who wrote a book called The Affordable City. He's someone I know a little bit, and I think his framework is useful. So subsidy is a question of how much money are you willing to spend to house the most vulnerable people. This is a crucial question, and LA certainly could do more to spend specifically on housing for folks who are vulnerable. That said, LA actually does spend a good deal of money. We've invested, billions of dollars. The county and the city level, we've invested billions of dollars for the last 10 years. So I think, and I would make the case that we can and should do more. Money alone can't solve this problem. What about stability? Again, stability is the idea that people, whether a homeowner or a renter, should be able to stay in their home in reasonable circumstances over time, right? In the case of a homeowner, you might not know this, but federal policy in the U.S. does a lot to create stability for homeowners. If you own a home, you probably got a 30-year fixed mortgage. That mortgage would not exist if the U.S. government did not subsidize those types of loans, because just the market would not normally create that kind of product where you pay the same amount every month for 30 years, right? Not saying it's good or bad. There's good and bad aspects of the 30-year fixed mortgage and the fact that we subsidize it. The reason we do it is to create stability for people who own a home. So similarly, a lot of cities, including LA, have policies in place to try to create stability for renters. LA, compared to most cities in the US, has pretty strong rules about stability for renters. These are things around rent control. Generally, these policies create trade-offs, right? So there's ways in which when you increase the strictness of rent control, there's negative side effects that has, which is not to say we shouldn't do it, but just that it's complicated. And again, I think it's important to point out that LA does have, compared to most American cities, fairly strong rental protection laws. So again, that's something we'll explore in 2024, but I just want to flag stability is not necessarily the reason why LA is so expensive. The biggest reason that's unique to LA in terms of housing and why housing is affordable is this third aspect, which is supply, which is simply how many people are there and how many housing units, right? So that idea of LA being the most overcrowded, we have the most number of people versus the number of units that we have. That's the biggest reason why LA is unaffordable. It's not the only reason, but it's the biggest reason. And it's the biggest reason I think that the church is called into attacking that problem, trying to solve that problem, trying to take practical steps. So how can we take practical steps, you might ask, to solve this problem? I think it's really important to highlight one of the biggest issues that we have in LA, and I think California as a whole, is that we just make it really hard and complex to build housing. And this is a place where, it's hard to build housing in every city in the US, but it is way harder in LA than most cities in the United States. This is not LA, this is San Francisco, but this is a recent magazine article. They found that it takes 3 years on average to build new housing in the city of San Francisco. So things have gotten so bad in San Francisco, the state actually came in and audited the process, because the state was like, we need to figure out what the heck is going on here in San Francisco. Why are you so unaffordable? LA hasn't done enough yet to cause the state to step in. So we don't have a similar kind of timeline as much detail that we have in San Francisco. In San Francisco, they found that some forms of housing, it takes 4 years or more to build. So 3 years is just the median, right? There's some that take less, some that take more. But LA, it also takes an extended period of time. And this chart that you can also see on the screen, entitlement process in Los Angeles. This is how complex it is. This is the pathway to get housing approved in LA. So you can see it's not like a simple, you do this, you get approved. There's all kinds of different people. If you're interested in learning more, I'll put in the description of this video the link to the report that this was contained in, along with some other just materials you can read. But there's this idea that when looking at why is housing so expensive in LA, one of the key reasons why is that we make it so complex to build new housing, and that takes time. when you're talking about development, time is money because you have to get a loan. The longer it takes you to get housing approved, is more time that you can't collect rent on the project that you got a loan to build. That means interest payments. That means the cost of rent to the inevitable person who moves into that housing will be higher. And so this is a big issue that we really want to focus on in 2024. Is how can we start to fix this, right? We're not suggesting that we're going to fix it all in one go, but we're gonna. So just to take a step back, what are we proposing to do? What are practical things you can do to join us in 2024? So here's our action plan. The first step we're going to take is in January of 2024, we are going to encourage your church, encourage all folks who are interested in our chapter to do the homeless count. That is a period, a week in January where every neighborhood in LA, volunteers will go out and they will do their best to count every person who does not have a home. They're living on the street. Again, this is a volunteer effort. I think this is an effort that the church should be at the front lines of caring for folks who don't have a home. We're not trying to do something big and dramatic. We're just simply trying to collect the data that our county needs to know how bad the problem is and how they can deploy resources. So we're going to invite you into that. It's going to be something where you do it as close to home as possible. We're going to organize throughout the city. We already have a location identified, tentative location identified on the east side of LA. On the west side of LA, we're hoping for more locations. So if you're interested, let us know. So we're going to invite you into that. And then February, we're on to already the primary election that's going to be coming up in 2024. Again, presidential election is going to get a lot of time and attention. We really want to equip you to, again, spend 20% of your time on that kind of national presidential election. We'd encourage you to spend 80% of your time focusing on all the other races, the local races where you have more voice, you have more impact. And often, I'm guessing, in most cases, you have less information. So the goal of our time in February is going to be to educate you, and even more so, we're going to educate you on how to educate others, right? How you can go to your church, you can say, hey, I want to have an event where we all get together, regardless of our politics, regardless of which candidates we support, and just do research together, discuss together, key races, impactful races. How can we ballot measures, right? How can we reason together and care together about our city? That leads us into the summer. The summer is really where we're going to press the most into housing specifically as an issue. So we're going to do some civic learning, right? Some groups that meet together and talk about the issue, and then some learning specific around the issue of housing. So if you saw this diagram and you said, I would like to learn more about that, great. That's what we're going to be working on in the summer. If you saw the diagram and you said, I don't necessarily want to learn more, I would also challenge you to learn more too, because again, this is how we're going to love on our city, is engaging issues that might be hard, that might be complex, but ultimately are impactful for folks' lives. Into October, we'll see the general election. That'll be something that we will try to rally folks around. Again, same idea. We're going to try to do education, 80% focused on what is going on here locally, 20% on the national race that's going to be getting the most attention. And then in December, we'll be reassessing this vision and saying, what do we want to do in 2025? So I just want to highlight that. The three specific things we want to do. The first is housing on faith land. So one of the good things that happened this past year was that the state of California passed this bill. And this bill would allow churches to bypass all land use regulations. So specifically zoning, bypass this, right, this process, and build housing on their land. So there's still rules about it, and not every church is going to have land. Not every church is going to have land that qualifies. But we believe that a lot of churches, this can be a great first step for you to say, hey, we want to build 100% affordable housing for folks who are in need in our community. And what we're going to do is try to help educate you on what you can do, connect you to people who might be willing to develop your land, right? We've already had conversations with a couple of churches where they say, hey, we have a parking lot that we don't use. How could we use that land better? And one of the ways that we would ask you to consider is can we build some housing on that? And that might be a tool for folks in your church. It might be just a tool for folks in your community. But that's something we really want to emphasize. The second is there's a lot of opportunities, again, going back to the complexity of this process and how that directly impacts people's lives. There's opportunities we have to speak into that. So this past year, another opportunity that came up, LA City. So not all of you live in LA City, but LA City is considering uh, making permanent something that Mayor Karen Bass, when she came in office, did on a temporary basis, which is to say, if you're building 100% affordable housing, we're going to make it so that you can get approved in 2 months instead of a process that takes years. We're going to make it so you can get approved in 2 months. The city did it. They saw thousands of new units be proposed. And I think what excites me is that a lot of these units, the majority of these units, were not proposed by nonprofits. They were proposed by for-profit businesses who said, because you're going to give me this certainty about my housing being approved in 2 months, I will willingly forego potential profit on how much rent I could charge. So the way affordable housing works is that your developer has to say, I will offer housing at a specific that is affordable to a specific income level for 55 years specifically. Simply because these developers are like, we really want to build this housing fast. It's been a great policy. It's something that the city needs to codify, but it's something that to codify, they need to hear from people, residents of the city and stakeholders in the city who care about this issue. Because there's always going to be pushback on anytime laws change, there's always going to be pushback. And so it's really important for folks like us to let the city know, hey, we think this is good. We think housing is a crisis. We think we need to do something. And then lastly, we really want to encourage your church to form regional partnerships. So we at the AND Campaign don't see ourselves as the group that's going to be the foremost experts on what is happening in the city, especially when we talk about the county, right? If you're located outside the county, we're never going to be experts on every city, on what's happening. But what we can do is equip you to go and find those people who are experts and then translate that, what they're saying about what's going on in the city, what's going on in the county, into practical action for your church. So that's going to be something we're going to help you facilitate in 2024. So how can you respond? I want to challenge anyone who watches this video. Don't just, um, again, don't just be hearers of the word, be doers, right? Respond, go and do likewise. So what are some ways you can do that? Really easy things you can do today. One is you can commit to doing the homeless count and bringing, I know we can't control whether people respond or invites, but you can at least invite. It says bring here, but really invite one or two people from your church or from your faith community, from your context to join you in that. Super practical thing to do. And if you make a commitment right now to do it, I think that will be a huge first step. Second thing you can do is you can commit to doing some kind of election research at your church. Again, you don't need to know how to do this yet. We will equip you. Um, we just are looking for folks to be willing to say yes. Um, in some cases, a third way you can respond is you can say, hey, I know my church has land that we don't put to full use, right? It might be a parking lot, it might be, um, you know, just unused space. There's lots of creative ways to do this. So I would say, like, if you even think it might be the case, it's worth bringing up with your church and it's worth connecting with us so we can help you kind of assess, is this viable or not. And then lastly, like, you might be someone who's saying, look, I have limited time. I don't know if I can do those things. We need people who will pray and we need people who will advocate, again, just by sending emails to whoever your elected representative is. So if you're someone who's like, I don't know if I can commit to these things, I would challenge you, consider just committing to be an email advocate and a prayer advocate. If you're watching this, I would check the description. We actually have a forum where you can commit to your response right now. If you got it via email, that form will be linked in the email. I would challenge you, just pick one of these options or pick multiple, and just press in to what Jesus is calling you to do right now, and join us in 2024 as we sort of do this thing. So thank you for watching. I know this was a lot. Appreciate your time, attention, and praying that together we can really go and do likewise in 2024. Thank you.